You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We now turn to our Reporters Roundtable. Joining us this week, it's Brendan Moore with Lee Enterprises and Jerry Nowicki with Capital News Illinois. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Always happy to be on, Cole.
Wanted to have you on this week to talk about this new AFSCME contract with the state. This has just been an underlying thing for the past 6 months, these ongoing negotiations. It popped up every once in a while. There was conversations around the impact it would have on the budget that was passed in May. And we heard that there was a handshake deal at the start of July. Now, officially this week, it was signed. Some of the broad numbers here. Around an 18% raise over 4 years for state workers as a part of this. A 4% raise kicks in right away, actually retroactively to that July 1st date, and it costs the state $625 million over the next 4 years. Brendan, we'll start with you. You had a column out this week on that contract, and it seems like this was both sides are categorizing this as a win, and it also just seems to be good to get it out of the way for both sides as well.
Yeah, it's good to have labor peace. It's AFSCME certainly came out pretty well in this, as you mentioned, Cole, with the 18% increase. They also got parental leave upped from 10 weeks to 12 weeks. A lot of wins here, and you can say what a difference a governor makes because as you can recall, during former Governor Bruce Rauner's administration, AFSCME's contract expired 6 months into his term. They went the whole rest of the term without a contract. Negotiations did not go well. The former governor was notoriously hostile to unions, especially public sector unions. Governor Pritzker came in with heavy support from labor unions. He was endorsed by AFSCME, actually. They negotiated a contract within his first 6 months, and now within the first 6 months of his second term, they had a tentative agreement that was just recently ratified. It's always kind of an uncomfortable thing when you're a proponent of, claim to be a proponent of labor, but also you are management. But it seems that negotiations went off without a hitch, and obviously, over the past 4 years, we've seen the governor really try to, support labor in terms of policy. They have a seat at the table pretty much on every major issue that happens in Springfield, and obviously, we just saw at the ballot box last November the so-called Workers' Rights Amendment pass, which codified the right to unionize in Illinois, outlawed right to work zones, or prevented them from being enacted. So this just kind of goes along with what the governor and supermajority Democrats in the legislature have tried to do in terms of supporting organized labor.
Yeah, Jerry, we heard all through May how the state's finances and this budget was going to be tight. The math was a little tough, and this contract was going to be one of those dollar amounts that we heard a lot from Republicans especially saying, this is unaccounted for. They need to focus on this. What is this going to mean? The governor insists that all of these dollar figures are included in the state budget. There's not a clear line item. Here's the money for the AFSCME contract, but it's included in each of the state agency breakdowns. $625 million, $200 million for this specific budget. How do you think this plays in, especially considering there's a lot of parts about this contract that we still don't know all of the details about?
Yeah, well, I think 200 million, is sounds like a large amount. It's certainly less than 1% of the overall budget. So, frankly, it's hard to see how this would move the needle in terms of whether they're going to have a surplus, whether that's going to eat into the surplus. But it seems to be all accounted for. And frankly, maybe they kind of knew in May what this was going to look like. Probably they did. They might have been close to an agreement there. I think what's sort of been impressive about this process, if you're looking at it from a pure political standpoint, is what we didn't see, and that's we didn't see union members taking to the podium and saying, we are going to need to demand this. We didn't see the governor saying anything about it, really, because I think that really spoke to how well negotiations must have been going. And frankly, they issued their news releases at the exact same time. Was it Monday, Tuesday, whatever it was? and basically the exact same news release, I think. And then it was also the same day that they announced a labor peace agreement for the Democratic National Convention in 2024 in Chicago. So frankly, I think that's a good week from the governor's perspective as someone who allies himself with labor unions, and it's a good week from the labor union's perspective because they got a lot of good things in that contract. One of the things that I guess Brendan didn't mention is that there also seems to be some sort of focus on making it easier to hire in state government. Now, they both alluded to it in the news release, but the details of that are going to be kind of what's important, and I don't know all of that.
And I'm sorry.
Yeah, we just talked about streamlining that process now that so much of the hiring takes place online.
Right.
And I don't know if that was a well-documented issue that the state had so many hurdles to jump through, at least when it seems, what seems to be with union policies, at least with that.
Right, and just to build on what Jerry was saying, the stars kind of aligned in a sense in that the state is in a relatively stable fiscal position right now. Obviously, we're kind of coming off the high of post-COVID, where revenues were sky high, but we're still not in a bad situation, so there was money to work with. And at the same time, as Jerry said, there have been issues hiring in especially in certain positions and maybe in certain parts of the state or in certain departments. And so there are some incentives in here. Again, a lot of the details we still don't know yet, but I think we're seeing a lot of employers across a lot of different fields really try to get creative in terms of how do you attract and retain employees, and the state of Illinois is not unique in that way.
Jerry, I want to continue that political side of this that you mentioned. When I spoke with AFSCME officials earlier this week, both just leaders and bargaining members as well that were at the table with this, they told me outright. One of the members at the bargaining table said, this wasn't always an easy process. There were things that they disagreed on heavily, had to come to find a middle ground on. And when I asked if they agreed with the governor's sentiment that this is a pro-union state, they said, yes, I do think that's true. Obviously, we want them to be more pro-labor than they are. That's the nature of negotiation, I guess. But it's really interesting to see how this was all kept behind closed doors. And one of the other sentiments, though, that they mentioned to me was that it's just jarring how different Illinois is from the states that surround it. And obviously, labor isn't the only issue that Illinois is like that on. But it's interesting to think about how other states become more and more polarized from each other, that maybe that has an impact on this as well, where maybe it's not easier, but more lucrative for both sides to present this allied nature in this whole negotiation process.
Well, and frankly, it's going to make his job as governor easier if you're dealing with a agency staffed by employees who don't think you respect them. It's going to be a lot of a bumpier ride. Certainly, I think Governor Rauner, as Brandon alluded to, experienced that. I mean, from the very start, he was fighting with unions, and look at those headlines went on for weeks and weeks about that. We're going to cover this contract with one story most likely, and then it's going to be, well, we're not going to think about it too much because they're on pretty good terms. So I think that's kind of the gist of it.
And to go off of what Jerry had mentioned, the no strike agreement that was struck between Democratic leaders and union leaders for the DNC in Chicago in 2024, one of the finalists for that was Atlanta. Atlanta's in Georgia, which is a right-to-work state. And many believe that Illinois, being such a pro-union organized labor state, helped Chicago secure the DNC in 2024. So, in some ways it's a red state, blue state thing. Democrats want to look like they're champions of labor. Republicans maybe want to, be, business friendly and, maybe do right to work. It's just one of those situations where, you do see the contrast between Illinois and, in that case, Georgia, or probably more prominently, most every day, our surrounding states.
Before we go, we talked about how there's not all of the information in this contract is not out yet. We don't know everything. Is there anything in particular you guys are really looking for to come out further on here?
I think further details on how they're making it easier to fill gaps. I mean, because that's like, as Brendan said, it's not going to be an easy thing that you could change with contractual language. But I think removing any roadblocks to quicker filling of vacancies and anything like that will be important to, staffing the positions that really make state government run.
And then there was streamlining was a word that was used a lot in many different areas in the press release that was sent out. One area that the governor's office emphasized was the streamlining of the process of dismissing employees that are chronically truant. So it'll be interesting to see what that process looks like, and quite honestly, just looking at how widespread that problem is. It's a big, ASME covers more than 35,000 employees across the state, so state employees, that is. So it very big contract, covers a lot of workers, a lot of agencies. It'll be interesting to see how that works out.
Yeah, it must be a somewhat prevalent problem if it's bad enough that the union would actually give ground on allowing an employee to be dismissed quicker in that sense.
Right.
But Brendan, Jerry, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. We'll be right back.